Thanks for coming out this morning. We're having a little technical issue here with the projector, and so we're going to skip Brandon's slideshow, and he's going to tell us the story of a fiddle and play us a little bit of music. You can read about Brandon in the program, and we're lucky to have him here with us, and so appreciate everybody coming out. Brandon Johnson.
Thank you, Mike, for asking me to be here. I've known him in a couple of different capacities, and we had a conversation back last summer about this at some point. It's cool to see it all come together. And it's a real shame that you can't see the slides that I started working on at 11 o'clock last night. So, they were good pictures, but we'll be just as well. My name is Brandon Johnson again. I, in the daytime, work as Executive Director of the Madison County Arts Council. Our location is in downtown Marshall. I've previously worked with Bridget at the Blue Ridge National Heritage Area. I ran the Blue Ridge Craft Trails, and so the Guild has been something close to me professionally and something I've liked for a long time, so it's a real honor to be here. My nighttime job, I like to say, is building instruments and repairing instruments. I started in about 2018, about this time, really got interested I played music for a long time, but I hadn't really started working on anything and never really thought I would. I have a master's in English literature and have a past life as an instructor of English, and never really did anything that much with my hands. And then Roger Howell, who's a great friend of mine in Mars Hill, he's recorded a memory collection of over 700 fiddle tunes that he's donated to multiple colleges and institutions, and lives on Banjo Branch, ironically, in Mars Hill. He's repaired fiddles for years and years, and he's been the source for a long time. And as a college student at Mars Hill, when I really got into this, he tolerated me coming up and just hanging out for hours and him showing me tunes. And it wasn't until about 2018 that I got interested in this. And the reason I got interested in this is because I was lucky to be the interim director of the Bascom Lamar Lunsford Festival. Raise your hand if you know who Bascom Lamar Lunsford is. That's a good percentage. I'm very happy to see that. So he was born on campus at Mars Hill University, on the spot where my office building was. And so he's kind of just, there's been cycles of Bascom in and around and throughout my life and experience in a lot of different ways. And then he lived on South Turkey Creek. His house is still out there today. It's the Pondering Bascom. It's a nonprofit working to do some great stuff. But Bascom did a lot of great things. He was a really interesting character, but his big legacy was giving dignity to mountain musicians in this actual music, telling them that it mattered, insisting that when they performed it, they wear their best. They don't caricature themselves. They don't wear overalls or anything like that. He said, this is something to be proud of. You need to wear your best when you step on stage. And there's legend that he attacked someone with a banjo one time who did not do that. So I'm not sure of the veracity of that. But anyway, where was I? Bascom Lamar Lunsford, huge figure in my life and in traditional music around here. But when I was working on the Lunsford Festival, it was the 50th anniversary. Mr. Lunsford gave his collection of instruments and his library, including his scrapbook, which if you've never seen it is really awesome. He hand-noted all these pictures from decades, dancing for the king and queen at the White House and all kinds of stuff. It's been really cool. But so for the 50th, I said we should do something really cool. So what we cooked up was Roger Howell was going to rehab Bascom Lunsford's dehorned fiddle, which this is a fiddle I made, which is a horned fiddle. Bascom's the only person that ever said that, so don't take that out of here. Nobody will know what you're talking about. But his dehorned fiddle didn't have corners. It just looked kind of like the outline of a number 8. And that's on display at Mars Hill University right now. You can go look at it. But Roger repaired that, and he also repaired a fiddle called Old Calico, which was played by Fiddlin' Bill Hensley, born in Hot Springs, buried in South Asheville, but a legendary fiddler who went to jail for second-degree murder at once and recovered, I guess, and played this fiddle that he was given from Governor Bob Taylor of Tennessee called Old Calico. And it's similar in appearance to this one, and the old timers called it calico because you've got this light colors and dark colors. And you can maybe see it on the top a little bit better. So, you know, calico patterns like on a dress, of course, would be light and dark. And so this looks nothing really like that dress pattern, but at least has that kind of color relationship. So Fiddlin' Bill Hensley would help start off Bascom Lunsford Mountain Dance and Folk Festival, which started in 1928. It was the first folk festival in the country and the model for folk festivals throughout the world after that point. So Roger, we were given, Mars Hill was given old calico, and Roger agreed to repair these instruments. And so I went up to his shop when he started the repair on old calico. And I saw him take the top off that fiddle, which is a shockingly violent thing if you've never seen it before. It can be. It was really, I was shocked. So essentially, fiddles are made with hide glue, which is animal protein glue that's water soluble. And the reason that's the case is because this is a spruce top, is around or just under 3 millimeters thick. And if it lives long enough and goes through 100 seasons of hot, cold, dry, wet, it's going to expand and change and crack along the grain lines. So you want to build a fiddle that lives long enough to crack. And so you use hide glue because it is water soluble and you can break the bond. So if you run a knife through these seams, you can take the top off. That's what gets pretty violent. You can heat it up and you can take your time, or you can just go at it. Grover Sutton, who's the grandfather of legendary Brian Sutton, guitar player who's from Asheville and hotshot Nashville player, I've heard it reported that he would take a butcher's knife and just put it under one end and pull it. And sometimes that didn't go well for him. I wouldn't advise that. But anyway, so I saw Roger take the top off the fiddle, and it kind of unlocked a realm of possibility that you could actually do this. I'd never in my life thought about it. And then I went, like any person would, I guess, to Craigslist and found a fiddle for $20 about 5 miles away from where I lived, being sold by the uncle, or nephew, sorry, of one of my really good friends and teachers. So it was all kind of like, all right, this is supposed to be happening. And so I bought this fiddle for $20, and it was a total wreck. And I took it to Roger, and I said, will you help me go through this and learn how to repair it? And he said, sure. So it took, over the course of the summer of 2018, I went back, and we learned this and this and this. And so we got through the first one, and then I bought my first fiddle for $75 to repair, also off Craigslist. And it allegedly belonged to Helen Robinson, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, for whom the amphitheater in Montford is named, where the Montford Park Players perform. And I fixed that and sold it for $275, and I was like, I'm on to something here. So it's been just kind of a wild goose chase after that point in my life. And then eventually I started building. So this violin is my 9th violin, which I built for myself to keep because if any of you are crafters, you've probably gone through the situation where your latest work is your best work, but then you sell it and somebody wants to see your best work and you just sold it to somebody else. So then you're showing something that's years old. So I said, I'm going to build something and keep it around. Okay, so there's a little bit about me and how I got here. I want to answer the question that I know is in all of your minds right now. What is the difference between a violin and a fiddle? Okay, if I had $1 for every time I'd been asked that, I'd have a lot more fiddles. So Roger Howell has 3 jokes that he uses to talk about this. One is the difference between a violin and a fiddle is $250 a night. Okay. Now I, being who I am, of course don't just want to make a joke out of it, but want to make it like painfully dry and explain that joke to you. I used to have a course in my composition classes where I had students explain a joke. And I told them at the outset, your job is to absolutely kill this joke dead to where it's never going to be funny ever again. And it's a great rhetorical exercise. But the joke is toast once you're done with it. So $250 a night means that someone who played a violin in a classical setting probably wearing a tux, probably in a big concert hall, probably in an urban center, is going to get paid more to do that than somebody who would play a fiddle. A fiddle would normally be played in a more rural context, in a more kind of egalitarian, less, I'm here to see this, more like of the people, let's get together and play music kind of setting, traditionally. The second difference, one has beer spilled on it. Okay, so a violin performed in that classical setting would never be touched by anybody but the musician, would be separate from anybody else that was there, but a fiddle would be played for a dance, for merrymaking, for a fun activity that might have libations, might have dance, and that kind of explains that one. Number 3 is one has strings and one has strangs. All right, and so lest you think that I'm actually playing on dialect, because I study dialect, I love dialect, I respect dialect, that at least tells you that the context of settings. Violin would be highly educated, urban, aware of lots of other things. Strings would be somebody from a more rural place, might have a little less education, might be a farmer or a worker in a less elevated kind of sense. So I always caveat that and give all respect to both pronunciations, but it is telling of what it is. But I'm going to give you the truth of the difference between a violin and a fiddle, and that is a violin is a violin is a violin. The instrument is always a violin. That's what it's been since the late 1600s. And that, a fiddle is more of a societal creation we want to put on it, and a way we use it in an easier and maybe more fun word to say. Some of the old timers would actually say violin and just cut off that last syllable right there, which is fun too. But the instrument is the instrument. There are some technical differences. You might have a different type of strings. Classical violins would have gut strings or something that would provide more color across the tonal spectrum. And a fiddle would largely have steel strings, which would be a little louder and more piercing and fill up dance halls and help people play and dance to that. There's a little bit of difference on the way the arch might be constructed, and your action might be a little different. So any of those things are very technical, and you'd have to be pretty adept at the instrument to even tell the difference. But the form as it exists today really comes out of Italy. In the late 1600s, Stradivarius, Antonio Stradivarius, is the kind of main person we think about. There were plenty of other people that did that. The Graneri family is another one. Amati and De Sallo predated Strad. So I'll break another myth for you. Every Stradivarius instrument you see today that's played has been altered because the scale was different back in the day. And there was the Baroque style. They used different strings. They had a shorter scale pattern, and they didn't need to project. So the instrument changed as concert halls got bigger and music had to be projected louder. So this is a scroll and a neck. And so in original Strads, this would be shorter. And so today they've done a scroll graft, which means cut off the scroll, get all these joints really uniform, and glue another scroll on top of it. So you can look at an old fiddle and see the joints right here sometimes where that's happened. So that's kind of a little thing that people don't know, that anything that's played in a modern context has been altered, even these $5 million Strads that people would look at. Anybody seen the red violin? Maybe? Yeah. All right, so that's happened. And then we move forward to instruments like this, which, believe it or not, says it's made by Antonio Stradivarius. Does anybody have one of those? There are millions and millions of instruments made by Antonio Stradivarius. And this is a trade situation, so that the violin started in Italy, and it became really, I don't want to say industrial, but manufacturing communities built up. There's a strong French building tradition and brands and styles. There's the Mirecourt region of France is one, and a way you can tell that is these side pieces. A lot of times they're joined, but in Mirecourt they would make it one piece, so there's no joint right here. That's what you can tell. And then there's strong German communities, the Saxony region, the Klingenthal region. There's the Mittenwald region, so there are makers associated with each of these regions. And they're actually different shapes. The Hof instrument from Klingenthal has a squarer top and kind of sharper corners. Arvel Freeman, a dear friend of mine, loved to play those. And so there's a lot of variation in actual forms and instruments you can find. But I just found this out in an interesting time warp that sounds a lot like today. The McKinley Tariff Act of 1890 dictated that when fiddles were made in Europe and shipped to the United States, as many were, so that's how this one started life, that they had to be documented with their country of origin. Okay? And so this one has the fake Strad label but doesn't say country of origin. In 1914, that changed to there had to be the words made in front of that country of origin. And then in 1921, it was dictated that that language all must be in English. So that's an interesting warp back to today, but it helps you date if you find an old fiddle somewhere. If you think about those things, you can understand where it was in the flow of America's trade. But if you find a Stradivarius in the attic, it is probably not a Stradivarius, just so you know. So a couple elements of the instrument, and I've got one. I always like to have one that's taken apart so people can see what it looks like. And it becomes like this, but it starts like this. And I guess I can walk with this mic, so I might do that now. So you start with blanks of wood, book match blanks of wood. So if you cut a chunk of a tree into a circle and slice it like a pie, you get wood this shape. And then you book match it, turn it back on itself. And I can't show you all that really well from here, but if you'd like to learn more about that, you can come up later and check it out. The back and sides and neck are 99% of the time made out of maple. The tops, this is a red spruce top, fairly local to either Western North Carolina or Eastern Tennessee. Red spruce grows above 5,000 feet here, and it is universally appreciated as one of the best tone woods. A little more particularly for guitar and mandolin. It kind of just hit in terms of the lumber industry and instrument production that when Gibson was building the F5 mandolins that Bill Monroe would make famous, and Martin was building their dreadnoughts that would become famous as pre-war Martins, they were using this red spruce. And so it became this legendary wood that's kind of maybe inflated in some people's minds, but it is a really good tone wood. And the difference here, and I encourage you all, you're more than welcome to come feel these woods separately. Spruce is stronger per weight than steel, but very light with great elastic memory. So it vibrates and it returns to its form. Maple is very rigid and hard and dense. So your top is going to vibrate and the back and sides are going to shoot that back out. And so the density in these two woods, I always love to hand somebody one in one hand and one in the other, and they're always kind of shocked. And they work very differently too. I brought a couple tools here. This is a gouge that you'd use to carve it out. This is the back I'm working on. You flatten one side and then make the outside arch and then dig the inside out and measure it with calipers all the way through so you get your thickness to the right way. It's entirely carved. This is really cool. This is the top. It's going to be for number 11. Did anybody hear about Ruby the red spruce? Does that name mean anything to anybody? So it was a red spruce from Haywood County that was the Christmas tree on the U.S. Capitol lawn in 2023, I believe. This is wood from that tree. It was harvested in Haywood County, and it traveled through all 100 counties in North Carolina, and then went to the Capitol. And Grandfather Mountain got some, and so this is from Grandfather Mountain. It's going to be used as a fundraiser for them. Any proceeds from the wood had to go into spruce restoration. And so there's some interesting lore around spruce. There's an organization called SASRI, which is the Southern Appalachian Spruce Restoration Initiative, which seeks to plant spruce and work on that habitat throughout the region. And there's also a mystery patch of spruce that was planted by the Daughters of the American Revolution down near Brevard that's been found recently. So there's really kind of a cool story about a local wood that's important here. One of my kind of dreams is to be able to say that every piece of wood on here came from within 50 miles of where we stand. That's kind of what I would like to do. And then you come to something like this. The fingerboard is ebony, the pegs are ebony, the bridge is maple. So that ebony is of course not local. There are some substitutes, but they would look very different if you use that. And there are some pieces inside of this. There's a sound post that you have to fit and wedge in between the top and the back that helps transmit vibration and sound. And there's also a bass bar, which is support right here, which is similar to a tone bar or a brace on a mandolin or guitar. And you can kind of see what one of those would look like here. And if you do that right, you fit it in. This one is carved out of the top, which is something they did in trade fiddles that they were trying to get out. And a lot of times they would just run a knife deep along either side and then dig out to that cut. So sometimes they'll crack along there. But anytime I take a top off and see that, I immediately take it out and put a new one in. All right, so I've talked about some of those pieces there, talked about hide glue. So the fiddle in Appalachia, of course, is something we think about a lot. And it kind of existed here in a lot of ways. Of course, there's Scotch-Irish influence in it, but everybody played it. And I was having a conversation with Kiave Bone, who's an enrolled member of the Eastern Band, the Cherokee Indian. And one time he made the great point of saying, you know, everybody looks to Western North Carolina as a source of music and tradition. And he said, I believe that is the case because so many people came here and played music. There's Cherokee music, there's German settlers, there's, of course, African descendants who were brought here. So all kinds of people were here playing that music, and it is all that power that he suggested made it powerful, instead of that music being powerful and being a magnet and drawing people. So kind of an inverse relationship I thought was really interesting. A fiddle, of course, is way easier to carry than a lot of things. We associate it with a guitar, but guitars didn't really come into the region until Sears and Roebuck made it possible. And it's because they're harder to make, harder to transport. This, of course, you can put it in a bag and carry along. I'll tell you more about that, an interesting story about that later. The fiddle also is a dance instrument. It's loud. You can play for a dance and entertain a whole group of people with just one instrument. So I think that's an important thing about how it has existed and continued. Another interesting piece of it, and I had a picture, one of the pictures I really would have liked you to see, but that's okay, I can explain it to you, is that I ordered this fiddle off eBay one time, and I took it out of the case, and I just heard stuff rattling around in it. And I was like, what is this? And so I looked in there, and I could see parts of 3 rattlesnake rattles, which is a common thing to happen. But I pulled parts of 14 rattles out of that fiddle. They had actually enlarged one of the F-holes to get these rattles in. And that I contacted the person I bought it from, and I said, do you know anything about this? This is pretty crazy. And so he said that he bought the fiddle from a woman whose either father or grandfather had played it in dance halls in Texas and Oklahoma. And so it was just this thing to collect rattlesnake rattles and put them in there. And so it is also common here to find that. Bill Hensley's fiddle, that first one I ever saw taken apart, had 2 rattles. Yes, ma'am?
Just turn your laptop around, shows.
Good thought. Let's see here. Okay. Here, I'll walk this around so y'all can see it. But so I'll go back into a little bit of the lore for the rattles. The fiddle is considered the devil's instrument, or the devil's box, a lot of times people would say. And that kind of comes in because it was the dance instrument, as my friend Joe Penland would say, because, you know, dancing led to kissing and hugging and so on and so forth. Also, drinking went along with dances and partying and that kind of stuff, so people called it the devil's instrument. And that led to people not wanting to keep them in the house. So people would hang them in the barn. And what lives in barns? Snakes and rats and spiders. So I think that the rattlesnake came in as kind of a scientific response to not wanting stuff to get inside your instrument. You can go on eBay all day and find fiddles that are rat hole, where rats have literally chewed out this hole and expanded it and made nests in them. Do you have a hand up?
Does it change any of the qualities of the resonance of the instrument to have the rattles in, like sympathetic resonance?
Yeah, so the rattles inside give some funky stuff. It's not consistent because the interior is all, there's very little place for it to actually catch. So it's going to be different every time. And it's honestly annoying. Like, some people like it, and it became this talismanic type thing of like, you know, of course you have snake lore, there's charming of snakes, there's, you know, the devil is snake, there's all kinds of things that you can bring into that. But then there's also, you know, like you can imagine if you walked up on a rattlesnake and killed it and then put that rattle in your fiddle, like you'd have a pretty intense connection to that, and it would be something pretty meaningful too. But no, I would not suggest it for tonal purposes. But I have a rattle that somebody gave me from a fiddle that they found in spruce pine, and you can put it up next to the rattles that I showed you, and it's noticeably smaller. It's an Eastern versus Western, which is pretty interesting. But the fiddle kind of was largely dance music. The music we hear today can kind of be traced back to some people who played by themselves a lot. Green Leonard, which flowed into Emmett Lundy, and then that led kind of into the round peak style. So if you hear old time music today, what you're probably hearing is music from the Surrey County region, round peak style, which kind of came to exist as it is because of the interplay of the banjo and the fiddle. The fiddle started playing fewer notes, but more rhythmic notes to connect with the banjo. Clawhammer banjo has some limitations style-wise, so it can't do all the things a fiddle can with a long bow that can constantly pull notes and a left hand that can move around. So that happened there. In Western North Carolina, a lot of the music is a little more notey, a little more left hand driven. There's a long bow style that I'm guilty of that you might see a little bit, which was still dance music, but you had a lot of propulsion in the way all the other instruments played also. So some of the important people, and I got some pictures of this, but if you go upstairs, you can see work from Wade Martin, and also Edsel Martin is used in promotional material for the Guild, who were carvers. Their father was Marcus Martin, who was a part Cherokee fiddler from down around Franklin, who moved here to work at the Beacon manufacturing mill in Swannanoa. And he came here to work as a security guard there, but was recruited because he was a fiddler. So he was kind of like a company fiddler at Beacon Manufacturing Mill in Swannanoa. Marcus Martin he was a carver and he made fiddles. The Swannanoa Valley Museum has one there you can go see. And, well, I'm not going to walk this around either, but Wade Martin, his son, was on the cover of The State magazine and has carvings upstairs that you can go look at. Which is a pretty cool connection. Mako Sneed was a Cherokee fiddler who's really impactful. People still play his music. Ernest and O.C. Helton were brothers. O.C. opened the Mountain Dance and Folk Festival with fiddle, and Bill Hensley and his brother Ernest played music with Jimmy Rogers in 1925. People don't know Jimmy Rogers recorded in Asheville in 1925, but it was the recording session in Bristol that really took off in 1927. So that's a pretty cool piece there. And I guess it might be time to pick a couple. You want to hear some music? Cool. Cuckoo's Nest. Check. All right. So I'm going to pull out this set list that I wrote 30 seconds before I started talking to you. In true fiddler fashion. So this is a tune called Cuckoo's Nest, which is pretty famous. If you've ever seen the movie Gettysburg, you've heard it. It probably exists in Ken Burns' Civil War somewhere at some point. I don't really want to talk about it musically all that much, although it's got some interesting music pieces. I learned this version from Arvil Freeman, who was from Madison County and taught in and around the region for decades. He went to Korea in the service, and then he was a butcher 6 days a week and played 7 days a week at Bill Stanley's Bluegrass in downtown. So if you can imagine being a butcher for 6 days a week and then going and playing music for 3 or 4 hours. And then he was the primary dance fiddler around here for about 50 years, and a dear friend of both of ours. So this is kind of his version of Cuckoo's Nest. Thank you. So if you heard in that second part where he goes, that's a variation on the melody there. And that's important because Arvil was a dance fiddler. And when you're a dance fiddler, you play the same tune over and over and over and over. So Arvil had all these really cool variations that he'd worked out. So you'd play a tune, you could say, oh, or you could play it this way, or you could play it this way. And that second part, that's his second time through, is how he plays on his great album, Saturday Night Fiddling, which I've always loved. So there's that. The next tune we're going to play is called 3-Star Hornpipe, and this was a tune written by Tommy Hunter, who is a Madison County fiddler. He had a house in Mars Hill, and then he also had a little cabin on Laurel Branch, which is in kind of between Mars Hill and Marshall. And I asked my friend about why he had 2 cabs, and he said, well, his wife was crazy. But anyway, so he wrote this tune called 3-Star Hornpipe, and the legend, which I believe is very true, Roger Howell has told me, that Tommy Hunter was in the service in Paris, and he was in a bar, and there was a bottle of vermouth that was called 3-Star Vermouth, and so he named this tune 3-Star Hornpipe, which is a really cool story for me. All right. Now, how's it go, Troy? I know. Yeah. as I should have said earlier, this is my dear friend, Mr. Troy Harrison, on guitar and banjo. Among many interesting facts, Troy retired from the state of North Carolina and was awarded with the Order of the Longleaf Pine. All right, so you want to do Billy and McLeod on banjo?
Sure.
Okay, we'll do Henry King's real quick.
Okay.
So I'll tell you, since we're talking about stories and fiddle tunes, the Stewart brothers, Travis and Trevor Stewart from Haywood County, learned from a lot of great people. Trevor unfortunately died about 7 or 8 years ago. Travis is still around playing great music and teaching in the jam program and doing some really excellent stuff. I discovered their album, the Stewart Brothers, too late in life. Not too late to learn a bunch of it, but I wish I hadn't heard it sooner. And I found this tune, which is really cool, called Henry King's Reel. And I knew that it was named after either their grandfather or great-grandfather, Henry King. And then I found out in a podcast lately that was recorded in 2015 that Henry King was a traveling preacher. And the legend goes that he one time was on his way somewhere with his daughter, and they were on a horse, and the horse was spooked and bucked, and they were thrown off, and he always carried a knife on his side and his fiddle. And so the fiddle fell off, and the knife went into his daughter's leg, and they put cornmeal on it and wrapped it up and went on to where they were going. And everybody survived. So this thing's called Henry King's Reel. Thank you. So as great of a guitar player as Troy Harrison is, you're really about to see something when he picks the banjo up. Which one do you want? You're in G?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll do one here that's known around here either usually as Miss McLeod's Reel or Hop High Ladies or Hop Light Ladies. Some people call it Did You Ever Know the Devil Uncle Joe? Uncle Joe. So which is, you know it's a legitimate fiddle tune because it has at least 6 names and you're not sure which one. And honestly, to go back to my literary heritage, decided to learn this tune when James Joyce referenced it in one of the stories in The Dead. So it was played on piano, which is not quite as cool, but we'll take it. So here's one called Miss McLeod's Reel. Or maybe it is. Hold on. There we go. Yep. Okay. Sorry. Try it again. Thank you. So I did play some double stops there and some really egregious longbow fiddling that's maybe too much. But to show you a little bit about what that's like, you would play two strings together a lot of times because it's louder and it does more sonically. And when you're a few acoustic instruments trying to fill a space, that's one easy way to do it. Darren Nicholson says he can spot a Western North Carolina mandolin player anywhere because you play for dances and there's a certain focus on the rhythm and the way you approach it. And so that's one of those things. So in that, let's give it a little bit of that. Just start over and I'll get it together this time. But the A part.
I'm already in C.
Oh, sorry, I screwed up. Here, I'll do it myself here. So. So it's kind of an exercise sometimes to like not make a note by changing a bow stroke if I can help it until I'm at the very end of the bow. So that's an example of a long bow right there. All right, so now we're in C and we'll play one and then we'll get out of here called Billy and the Logram. All right, thank you so much. I guess maybe do we have, if anybody has any questions, we can try to approach that for a minute or two? Okay. Or I just did a really good job and explained everything. So that's fine. If no questions, you're welcome to come up here and check some stuff out too. Okay, right here.
So the scroll that you saw out, you saw that by hand, I assume?
So the way that works, and I brought this, which is a scroll in
I might
process.
be calling it the wrong thing. The part on the front, the top?
Oh, the top, yeah.
Yeah, the holes.
Yeah, those. So that's cut with. It's a special. It's like a hacksaw kind of with a really long mouth
Oh, right, yeah.
that you can put you put your blade through and kind of trace it out.
Basically.
Yeah, like a jeweler saw or a coating saw kind of. Yeah.
And then, does it have to be that shape, or can you saw out different designs, or like?
Yeah, there are people.
circles or whatever?
There are people that do different designs. One of the things is if you do it well, a lot of times the nicks denote exactly where the bridge should go. or at least give you a point of reference. Now, trade fiddles usually, a lot of times, are definitely not that exact or perfect. But people can definitely stylize this in any way they want to. There's a difference in Stradivari F holes and Granary F holes, and Stainer F holes look distinctly different. So yeah, and there are people who do stuff that doesn't look anything like this. My MO is I want to kind of exist within tradition and make a couple changes that somebody who knows what they're looking at can tell and find. So there's a couple things I would do differently that somebody who is a maker would look at and be like, oh, that's interesting. But otherwise, I want you to know what it is. I don't want it to look like a green bean or something up here. So
Did you know Jackie Ward?
I know the name.
She
Yeah.
was head of the Mountain Folk Festival
Oh, yeah.
for so many years.
Yeah,
Worked
yeah,
with
yeah.
her in the Chamber of Commerce.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. I'll put my name tag on it. Steve, you had your hand up?
Yeah, curious, you said you're using hide glue. Are you using hot hide glue or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's boiled in a double boiler every single time I use it.
And are you prepping the wood prior to applying glue?
I sometimes will kind of hold it over the pot where I warm it, but a lot of people will warm either with a hair dryer or something the joints, but I typically don't do that because it's all going to happen really quickly and it's not a huge surface. So, but hide glue is scary for a lot of people to use because you don't just pour it out of a bottle. You have to double boil it, so it comes in granular form and you have to dissolve it. And I've actually learned you can store it in the refrigerator and bring it back out and put it in and it'll kind of seal and not rot because it is organic material. And then so you just heat it up over again, and then you can work with the consistency. You can add water in and thin it out, or let it boil out and thicken it up if you want to.
I assume you're using a pre-rub.
Yeah. I'm fortunate this is the only thing I've ever used because a lot of guitar builders would just use Tight Bond or something, and people are really scared of hide glue. But it has a suctional property. I don't know, suctional a word, I guess. So like it does stuff in and of itself. It kind of brings things together in ways that just Tight Bond or kind of normal glue wouldn't.
But you can also take it apart later on.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm. You can take it apart. Bridget?
So you were mentioning the different types of wood that you use.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine, are those different overseas? Like, did they use different stuff way back when?
So interestingly, I'm glad you brought this up. There's a lot of kind of cross-continental connection between the Appalachian region and some kind of Eastern European really high mountain, Carpathian mountain ranges. So there's very similar wood that's grown there. And if it's European, we would label it, but you can get some with very, very similar characteristics. And where Stradivarius got his woods, and they call it the magical forest, and they would go and pick out trees and let them come down and all this kind of stuff. So it's pretty high mountain climate to grow the spruce tall and straight. Spruce at this latitude grows so high that it doesn't grow super tall and straight a lot of times. Like if you're on Grandfather Mountain, you can see some spruce trees, but they're kind of like short and twisted and gnarled. They're not like long, perfect, straight trees. So the further north you get, you can maybe find better trees. Yeah. All right. Great. Well, thank you all so much. Yeah.
Would you ever be interested in coming to a part of a wood club that meets